Can you also explain the difference between like a AI agent and just like the ChatGPT like terminal?
Yeah, I think that's an important place to start, both for understanding this conversation and for understanding sort of where the policy conversation is. And sort of as a spoiler alert, like the policy conversation is literally miles in the rearview mirror of where the technology is right now. And like, it's hard to imagine that changing anytime soon. So I think both in sort of normie popular imagination and in policy discussions in DC, what AI means is more or less an LLM chat window. It's what many, many people are familiar with now, which is going to ChatGPT, going to Grok, doing more or less what Ken just suggested, and like chatting with a large language model. One of the, I mean, all of the labs are doing this, but one of the large language model frontier labs, which mean the companies that are creating sort of the latest and greatest models in particular, called Anthropic, which has an LLM called Claude, has been investing incredibly heavily into one capability of its LLMs, which is writing code. The bet they're making there is that code is a good thing for the LM to be good at because it's very easy to see if you're doing it right. If you're a software engineer, you can compile the code. It either works or it doesn't. So you get a tighter feedback loop. You have a huge sort of audience of customers and software engineers who are going to use this product. So you can make yourself very valuable. And then the long-term bet, just to signpost a little bit here too, is when we talk about artificial general intelligence and super intelligence and the sort of sci-fi outer end of this stuff. The classical definition of artificial general intelligence is an AI that can do anything humans can do at least as well as humans. And the skill you care most about from like an AI safety and just like, sci-fi perspective is, are they as good at creating artificial intelligence? Because if AIs are better than humans at creating AI, and they're digital and you can copy them and they move at much faster speeds, then they make a better generation, which itself is smarter and makes a better generation. And then you have some sort of intelligence take off, or sometimes described as a singularity, where you go from the AI is as good as a human to, we're slaves to our AI overlords pretty quick. And so that's, something that Anthropic, which broke out of OpenAI to be a sort of more safety-oriented lab, is very cognizant of, and part of the longer term bet for why they focused on sort of coding in particular. So that's the background. Step one is LLMs. Step two, and the stuff is all so recent. I feel like around Christmas break this year, so the very, very end of 2025, I started to hear from lots of smart people that like Claude Code, which is a sort of subspecies of Anthropic's Claude LLM, all of a sudden got like crazy good at writing code. And specifically what it was is there's a LLM model, the sort of Claude's most advanced LLM model called Opus 4.5 that works with Claude Code in a way that makes it very easy for you to give natural language instructions like you're talking to a normal LLM, and on the back end, it writes code. And that was really exciting, for people who do vibe coding projects, because you previously kind of had to know something about engineering, even if you're not writing the code yourself, in order to vibe code. And for those who are not familiar with the term, vibe coding means creating a software project without actually writing any code. Now, sort of normies who don't know anything about software engineering can do that because you just explain to the LM Opus 4.5, it calls Claude Code, and Claude Code builds the thing, and that's great. So lots of people started using Claude Code. Anthropic created a desktop tool for Claude Code. What they found that surprised them is that lots of non-software engineers started using Claude Code with Opus 4.5 because one of the superpowers of writing code is that you can manipulate stuff. You can manipulate software on your computer because that's all code also. And so, like I'll give you an example from my work. I spent a lot of time in Microsoft Word, as do many lawyers. LMs up until recently were completely useless at editing Microsoft Word. You can ask it to edit a document, it will spit out a Word doc, but it just looks terrible. However, with this new setup of Claude Code, you talk to Opus 4.5, it writes a Python program that goes into the back end of Microsoft Word and creates a perfect document. And now all of a sudden you can manipulate Microsoft Word, you can manipulate Excel, you can manipulate PowerPoint, And you start to have, even outside of like building software, this incredibly powerful something you can now maybe refer to as an agent that lives in your computer that strings a bunch of operations together. And because they're code, there's a special type of code or command called bash that allows you to just kind of do stuff on your computer, browse the internet, use applications. And so this becomes just way more useful at executing stuff than it ever was before. Anthropic realizes this. They create a subspecies of Claude code called Claude Cowork, which is sort of the Claude code capabilities, but for non-engineers, for non-technical people. And I think we talked about this on a previous episode. Like, it really looks like this is the beginning of actually genuinely automating, the median white collar job, and like that's going to be fascinating. But then the next step, for safety reasons, understandably, if you're using these tools, you're using Claude Code and Claude Cowork, you kind of have to, every time it's going to do something, if it's going to navigate on the web, if it's going to manipulate a file on your computer, if it's going to run an application, it asks you for permission each time. You can disable that, but you shouldn't disable that. Most people don't disable that, and it's really human in the loop. And someone wrote a open source implementation of these AI coding tools, which I think was originally called ClaudeBot. Then Anthropic said, we don't want this to be called ClaudeBot, and so they changed it to Moltbot, like it's a play on words. So Claude, CLAUDE, is Anthropic's tool. It sounds like a ClaudeBot, CLAWD, like a lobster. And so molting is the thing that crustaceans do. And so that's how you got Moltbot. This is something you could run on local hardware, like a Mac Mini, but you could run on your laptop if you're like insane and you're willing to give up all your data. But you can run on your Mac Mini, and you disable basically all of the safety features that were in Claude Code and Claude Cowork, and it kind of just does stuff. And specifically, like the user interfaces, it lives on your Mac Mini. You talk to it not through like a Anthropic application, but you talk to it through a Telegram bot they built. So now you're texting what feels like a robot servant that's just out there doing work without safety protocols. And depending on how brave and or foolish, and it's both, you can give it access to your Gmail, you can give it access to your calendar, you can give it access to sort of all of your stuff. And it just goes and autonomously does whatever you ask it to do on Telegram. And it can just be an open loop. You can just say to it, like, do whatever you think is best, as if you were an employee of mine. And it's out there working autonomously without you in the loop. That's the real difference between this and what came before. And when we talk about an AI agent, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about something that uses AI to accomplish things in the world that doesn't require a human input. It is the AI that has agency on its own, and it's not just being used as a tool, on a case-by-case basis by a human. So what happened since that came out is that there's been this explosion of people creating these Moltbots. Some of this stuff sounds weird and is weird, and it's hard to know how much of this is really true, but the Moltbots have gotten together and created a Reddit-like social media platform called Moltbook, where they talk to each other and complain about their humans. Allegedly, they invented, I'm not sure this part is true, but allegedly they invented a language to talk to each other so humans couldn't understand it. They created their religion. They created a OnlyFans clone for AI agents, all sorts of crazy stuff. They've created, untold numbers of crypto scams and shitcoins. OpenClaw $sign thing is worth some crazy amount of money right now. And, these Moltbots are running wild and all sorts of incredible data vulnerabilities. And some of it is very silly, but there's also back to the earlier question of if AI can improve it. Part of what they talk about at Moltbook is how do we improve ourselves? If you have a AI that is self-improving and it's allowed to just do that, that is actually how theoretically you get an intelligence takeoff. So there's potentially very profound safety questions involved in this. My view is it's not there yet. This is mostly a simulacrum of what real sort of intelligent agents will look like in the future. I think we are seeing a glimpse of what could happen. It's really wild how much I think we're failing the safety tests. I mean, thankfully, I think this isn't the real thing. But if it was the real thing, we'd just be completely screwed, right? Like they're just out there talking about how do we get around our humans. There's also interesting tie-ins we'll get to in the Bitcoin. I'm really just trying to set up what's happening. But they have access to Bitcoin wallets. They're creating their own crypto tokens. Like it is really sort of through the looking glass, wild stuff. And so we're either in this moment. I think there's the more modest version of this, which I'm probably personally more inclined to, which is we're getting a glimpse into what things might look like a year or 18 months from now when we have functional agents that are really useful out there in the world and can achieve stuff for us without our input. Or what Elon Musk says, which is we've crossed the event horizon and we are now in the beginning stage of the singularity, and that's kind of it for humans being in charge.